Not long ago in Star Citizen, 778 players went to the desert moon of Crusader to run Star Citizen's very own annual rally, the Daymar Rally. In this event, which in 2024 drew more than 1,000 participants, is put on by the Atmo Esports team, led by Corsair, who originally imagined our very own race based on the Dakar Rally. The event is split up into 3 wings: bikes, buggies, and trucks. Each team is allowed one driver, a backup driver, and a support vehicle overwatching their progress and guiding them across the desert. This may not sound like much, but as an endurance race, these players will be navigating a mixture of dunes, canyons, mountains, valleys, fields of rock, and more for 510 kilometers across night and day on the moon of Daymar. My own org, the Garden Interstellar Initiative, raced in the bike and buggy division, and we did pretty good, but more on that later. Meanwhile, security blankets the sky overhead, protecting the race from pirates and maintaining order amongst the racers. VIPs are ferried around to watch the race from luxury ships. Cameras are streaming the racers out worldwide with full hosted broadcast support. Viewers can track racers on screen, interviews with the racers and community are happening, and there's a full prize pool for the winners. While many features and also stability are in a place that make events like this a pain to put on, they show the real potential of a game like Star Citizen. So let me give you an inside look at the largest event in this game and where the game needs to improve to make way for more esports in space. Thank you for coming to my Tomato Talk. The race started out as most Star Citizen events do, at the main menu. With over 1,000 participants, a coordinated launch across 10 different game servers was desired. As is the case with Star Citizen, this didn't happen. As I reviewed my past coverage of the event, I realized most years have actually gone pretty smoothly, but this year was riddled with stability issues. Not all servers launched together, and some required 7 different attempts before getting the whole group into the game. Because a simultaneous race start was desired across all servers, those struggling servers held the others back by more than 1.5 hours, and ultimately a simultaneous start was simply not possible. In addition to this, with all the persistent items grouping up in one place on the server, the frame rate and overall performance in that immediate staging area was awful. It was very hard to film at this time, but things did improve as the race went on. While the race did continue to be delayed, players waited patiently at the start line in support ships, security vessels, and buggies on the ground. At this point, many of the participants had been present for 4 to 6 hours, and many viewers were there for already 1 to 2. Yet you would find that almost nobody was throwing in the towel. Many of us know how Star Citizen operates. It's not a true event unless setup takes at least an hour, just as it's not a true rally if all participants finish. Everybody involved has signed an unspoken contract that the game may ruin your game. Because at the end of the day, this is still a live online game in the middle of being developed and very much unoptimized. Despite this, players obsess over the chance to participate in these team-based events because the freeform nature of Star Citizen allows for some pretty unique races and meetups. And at risk of getting ahead of myself, once you cross that finish line at the end of your race, you can just hop in your ship, fly back across the system, and get back to mining for money. This point comes from our own bike racer, Signusian, who actually drove for our org to win 2nd place in the bike division, with the added detail of drug running. While community events might not seem like the biggest reason to play an MMO, they've proven a key part of what makes Star Citizen unique and enticing for a lot of players, even while they're still getting on with their regular gameplay. But anyways, back to the race. I was stationed in Buggy Server 2, filming our garden racing Tumbril Cyclone piloted by one of our members, Azon Keel. Well into the 2nd day of the event, he and everybody else was well and ready to go as the final countdown began. After a few more issues, including a false start due to some behind-the-scenes technical problems, the race in Buggy Server 2 finally began, and players were left to proceed 92 kilometers across the desert to the first checkpoint. The race was on. As soon as it began, spectators could immediately see the different strategies forming for each team. My own team took a hard swing out right to avoid the vast stretches of canyons that immediately hits the players in the front and the mountain ranges off to the left. While this can slow you down with added distance, it can ultimately save you a lot of time when you don't have to double back around the bottom of a canyon that you fell into, especially in the dark. But that doesn't save you from everything. Daymar's not a friendly place. Mountain ranges, canyons, fields of rocks, and a whole bunch of divots in the ground can make it hard to navigate and plan ahead. Anything can happen. With such a long distance to go, any number of small changes could spell victory or defeat. As the race continued, it became very clear which teams were successfully navigating and which were experiencing some difficulty. The Garden Buggy Racing team was up in the top 5 of their server for most of the first night and morning, validating the early strategy, but there was still plenty of difficult terrain to navigate. On the extreme opposite end in the left flank of the race, a team had actually dove into the mountains to escape the canyons, finding themselves in a bit of a predicament as they were stuck working through that for much of that first night racing. Another team had their own technical difficulties and needed to take a supply stop. Throughout the race, support on board the ship overhead are meant to call out upcoming obstacles, make strategic calls, and resupply the ground crew. As engineering and repair gameplay come online, only one vehicle will be allowed, and that vehicle's survival and maintenance are part of the challenge. But at the moment, support can carry additional supplies in a limited capacity for racers. And despite the course being so long distance, there's actually a surprising amount of close proximity racing, as many teams were within just a kilometer or two of each other. At points, my own team was within the line of sight of the next racer. The race does allow for attacking one another, which I did capture in previous events in the truck division, but since most buggies don't have heavy weaponry, this didn't come up in the buggy server much outside of a few occasions. When it does come into play though, support ships may also be in danger. It's less common than you'd think, but between the possibility of pirates camped out on the course to ships attacking the race overhead and your fellow racers possibly gunning for you, it's good to know how to protect yourself. Now, as the race continued through the first night and several teams, including my own, came within 10 kilometers of that first checkpoint, our buggy hit a glitch. Ground physics in this game are still quite wonky, and unfortunately the company has not done a good job of supporting the ground navigation experience despite an update to it last year. When your car encounters a glitch, your team has to quickly assess the problem, decide whether it can be solved with a tractor beam or a full vehicle swap, and then get back into the race. First place during this time continued up ahead through the rocky fields and rolling hills that preceded Eagle Flat's checkpoint. The first place camera and support ship both shadowed the Cyclone's movements as they weaved their way to the first stop, and after getting inside, checking in, and getting back out to the same buggy, the second, much longer stretch was on. And as the sun rose to greet them, racers turned west for the next 400 plus kilometers of desert. With the bright morning sun, it was much easier to navigate after the first checkpoint, and surprisingly, racers were still pretty close together. But things would begin to change quickly as the first few dozen kilometers after said checkpoint are a field of large boulders surrounded by smaller rocks that required plenty of sidetracking to reach the goal. So canyons without the canyons. As the race continued, the midday light of Stanton began painting everything that dark Daymar yellow. Holding their position in the race, Azon continued on the ground, driven forward by another of our team, Tyrus Rex. Together they progressed the rock field well, and while the race was well underway at this point and looking like a good time, Star Citizen struck, and the entirety of this server's race ended in the blink of an eye. The 30k error is the worst known to Star Citizen players. It has been a consistent problem of varying degrees for as long as I can remember, which isn't very long. And we still await the replication layer separation and crash recovery that will hopefully help to mitigate them in upcoming updates. Luckily, the Atmo team was kind enough to let me catch up to our own bike team on the other server. While the buggy race runs for about 6.5 hours, the bike team comes in at around 2.5. So I was able to just get in towards the last leg. The speeds are higher, the stakes are higher, and honestly, it gives some pod racing vibes. In this server, our team was actually in the lead, and while that lead was solid, anything can change. As I caught up with them, our driver was moving slowly across crater-pocked plains as he was hit by one of Daymar's sandstorms. While this won't injure him, it makes driving and navigating more difficult. Second place, who was on their own Dragonfly, kept pace from behind at higher speeds, trying to close the gap. With confidence of the upcoming stretch to the finish line, our team entered another of the scattered fields of boulders. The nice part about these bikes is that a good pilot can time their airtime to clear a lot of these boulders quickly. And while our team was able to keep the lead going through this boulder patch, the racers' paths did diverge quite a bit as our driver hung right in relation to the direction of travel. He also needed to stop so that he could drink some water as his hydration levels were getting low. Yeah, that's a thing. But luckily, just as another sandstorm hit, our racer was out of the rock field and back onto the plains. Still in a sandstorm though. So as those plains did transition into canyons, our pilot Vastin in the MSR above closed distance with our racer to provide a better lead and better visibility. This level of strategizing was key to running a good race in the bike division. With such high speeds, you need to be able to make calls quickly for over 2 hours and communicate constantly between you and your team. The canyons slowly turned into hills as the team continued forward, and before long the hills dumped them back onto hill-covered plains. While trying to get more and more shots, inevitably as it happens, I did end up crashing myself, and had to make my way back out to the race. By the time I returned, the second place team had closed the distance with our org, as our team took a turn around one of the last mountains to avoid some canyons. The second place team, Delta Deitis, represented here by Space Tech, were able to champion the canyons and make a move for first. They ultimately did end up hitting the final sand dunes first, which allowed for a quicker run to the finish line and ultimately the first place grab. It was a close win to an over 500-kilometer race, with only 67 seconds between winners. A congratulations to all the teams who finished, and a huge thanks to Atmo Esports for putting on the event, and for everybody involved in helping. This coverage of the Daymar Rally is a heavily summarized version. You can catch my full stream of the event down below, but I also have previous coverage you can look into. I usually aim for a more documentary feel, but this year I felt this format fit best. The event itself is an incredible show of organization, passion, and camaraderie on various levels. It showed the strengths of Star Citizen, a boundless play space, access to all vehicles in a first-person perspective, dynamic planet rotations, weather and biome generation, and of course, a single playing space. But it also exposed the poor performance, the fragility of servers at the moment, and the overwhelming lack of basic features that players have waited years for. For all good and bad in this event, it's proof of a competitive scene in Star Citizen with a lot of potential, mirrored across dogfighting, FPS gameplay, and ship racing, as well as maybe some industrial pursuits. Whether in the PU or in Arena Commander, if the game can find its benchmark, I have no doubt everything will fall into place for more competitive events in Star Citizen's future. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're looking for more, I actually just interviewed Crucian from the Atmo team on my second channel on the Launch Sequence podcast. Recently, I've also interviewed Lone Vault Wanderer about Star Citizen from the outside perspective, as he's more of a Bethesda content creator, and a couple of industry engineers about the capabilities of server meshing. I release this podcast once every week with a new guest on my second channel, Space Tomato 2. And if you're looking for more Star Citizen coverage, consider subscribing here as well. I hope you learned something new in this video, and I'll catch you in the next.